Hello, friends. Last week I was out here in front of this fig tree at evening time, and you heard some of the evening sounds around here. I decided to come out in the early morning today, and the relative stillness of this place. I can hear the birds singing. I can also, while I was setting up, heard a siren, heard garbage trucks going by, so you may hear some of those noises in the background as I record this. I'm going to let that be. One of the goals that our annual conference's Climate Justice Task Force that I'm a part of has put forth for this year is to encourage all of our church members to spend 10 minutes outdoors each day. And as I've been thinking about that goal over the past couple of weeks and how to articulate that in a newsletter article to our annual conference. Oh, here comes a car going to by. I'm going to pause for a moment. Probably somebody heading off to work. As I've been thinking about that goal of being outside for 10 minutes, even how sometimes that's hard for me to get out. But when I've gone ahead and done it, the rewards are like instantaneous. It doesn't matter if there's extra noise out here, human-caused noise. It doesn't matter whether it's a little misty like it is this morning here or bright and sunny. There's always some reminder of God's grace, God's love that is embedded in the fiber of the universe, and an invitation for us to be in harmony with that. It calms the spirit in spite of the climate anxiety that I experience from holding on to or exposing myself, leaning into the really bad news that is piling up every day around climate change. And it keeps me going in spite of how dire the future may look to us. I've been reading, as I've mentioned, Brian McLaren's Life After Doom book, and heard a talk with him yesterday, and how he says the word hope is really overrated, but courage and wisdom are where we have to be. We want to not give up. We want to keep showing up. And that is enlivened by our spiritual practices. Today you will hear a message from Pastor Nancy Wilson, who's a retired clergy who moved out here from New Mexico and came to Santa Rosa and is affiliated now with Christ Church. And I believe that you will really be blessed by her message and her quiet spirit. Let's take a moment now to pause and experience God's grace before we move forward with more of the spoken and musical parts of worship.
reading from the Gospel of Matthew. Early in the morning, as Jesus was returning to the city, he was hungry. He saw a fig tree along the road, but when he came to it, he found nothing except leaves. Then he said to it, "You'll never again bear fruit." The fig tree dried up at once. When the disciples saw it, they were amazed. "How did the fig tree dry up so fast?" they asked. Jesus responded, "I assure you that if you have faith and don't doubt, you will not only do what was done to the fig tree, you will even say to this mountain, 'Be lifted up and thrown into the lake,' and it will happen. And if you have faith, you will receive whatever you pray for." Learn this parable from the fig tree. After its branch becomes tender and it sprouts new leaves, you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see all these things, you know that the human one is near, at the door. I assure you that this generation won't pass away until all these things happen. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will certainly not pass away. Another reading from the 2nd chapter of Joel. Don't fear, fertile land. Rejoice and be glad, for the Lord is about to do great things. Don't be afraid, animals of the field, for the meadows of the wilderness will turn green. The tree will bear its fruit. The fig tree and grapevine will give their full yield. Children of Zion, rejoice and be glad in the Lord your God, because God will give you the early rain as a sign of righteousness. God will pour down abundant rain for you, the early and the late rain as before. The threshing floors will be full of grain. The vats will overflow with new wine and fresh oil.
I once had a dear friend who just happened to be a tree. When Frank and I lived in New Mexico, I used to walk along an arroyo that ran behind our house, and right where the pathway from our backyard dipped down into that dry riverbed, a scrawny little tree shot up at about a 45-degree angle. Quite a precarious perch. And I don't know how many times I charged past that tree intent on getting my daily walk in, but one day it just caught my eye. And I stopped and I remember saying, "Well, look at you." And so began our friendship. From then on, I would stop whenever I was near, touch a spindly little twig, and say, "Hello, my sister." And there were a few times when something passed between us. And if you've ever had a special tree in your life, you may know of what I speak. In our reading this morning from Matthew's Gospel, Jesus is on his way back to Jerusalem with his disciples, having spent the night in the village of Bethany. He is hungry, we are told, and approaching a tree by the side of the road and discovering no fruit on it, Jesus did what we all would do, right? He curses the tree. "May no fruit ever come from you again," whereupon the tree withers instantly. Now, the first question to pop into my mind, and maybe yours, is why? Why curse that tree, Jesus? It can't help it. It's just an innocent tree by the side of the road. I wonder if the barrenness of the fig tree might be related to what Jesus has been dealing with lately. Just the day before, a large crowd had spread their palm branches on the road, shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna," as Jesus rode into the city on the back of a donkey. Later that day, Jesus entered the temple, where in a rage he ended up driving out the buyers and sellers of animal offerings and upending the tables of the money changers. I have very much appreciated the insights on our fig tree scriptures that our pastor Lindsay and Pastor Lori from Windsor have shared in the first 2 Sundays of our 4-part series on creation care. Those insights lead me to suggest this about today's story, that the crowd who one day showers you with adulation and by week's end is calling for your execution, that the desecration by predatory merchants of the temple's sacred space, and that the fruitless branches of a fig tree when one is hungry, that all of these point to a world out of whack. Human depravity, as well as natural barrenness, indicate that the flourishing of creation that God has intended is being thwarted. But let's notice that the question of why Jesus curses the fig tree is not really the question before us this morning. The disciples' question to Jesus in this passage is, in fact, not why, but how. How did the fig tree wither at once, they ask. Jesus responds, "Truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only will you do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be lifted up and thrown into the sea, it will be done. Whatever you ask for in prayer with faith," Jesus says, "you will receive." And so suddenly, the cursing and withering of a fig tree have become an opportunity for Jesus to teach about the power of faith and prayer. As Jesus nears the completion of his time on earth, as the walls of his suffering and death begin to close in on him, he seems intent here to teach his closest followers what their life in his physical absence has the potential to look like. Prayer with faith, according to Jesus, will empower them in ways they might never have imagined. In the light of our care for creation, then, let's consider prayer and faith. And while we're at it, let's add one more thing, remembering the bold declaration from the Apostle Paul writing to the church at Corinth, "If I speak in the tongues of angels and of mortals, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing." So let's add love to the mix, because we do not want to be nothing. and because without it, faith doesn't seem to much matter. So prayer, faith, and love, these three, and what might they have to do with our call to be earth keepers, caretakers of creation? In her splendid book, Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants, Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is a biologist, a teacher, and a member of the citizen Potawatomi Nation, writes this: imagine seeing your grandmother standing at the stove in her apron, and then saying of her, "Look, it is making soup. It has gray hair." In English, she writes, we never refer to a family member, or indeed to any person, as it. That would be a profound act of disrespect. It robs a person of selfhood and kinship, reducing a person to a mere thing. So it is that in Potawatomi and most other indigenous languages, we use the same words to address the living world as we use for our family, because, she says, they are our family. Wall Kimmerer refers to this as the grammar of animacy, and goes on to write, to whom does our language extend the grammar of animacy? Naturally, she says, plants and animals are animate, but the Potawatomi understanding of what it means to be animate diverges from the list of attributes of living things that we all learned in Biology 101. In Potawatomi 101, rocks are animate, as are mountains and water and fire and places. Beings that are imbued with spirit, our sacred medicines, our songs, drums, and even stories are all animate. She goes on to note that what is considered inanimate are usually things made by people. Of an inanimate thing, like a table, we say, "What is it?" And we answer, "Table it is." But of apple, we must say, "Who is that being?" And reply, "Apple that being is." Now, I am just in awe of how understanding the place of human beings in the natural world can be embedded in the very structure of a language. Notice the difference. Hear the difference between what is it? It is a tree, and who is it? He is a tree. The latter just has a feeling of warmth and relationship to it. In the language of animacy and in the reality that that language both reflects and helps to shape, we humans are related to all created beings. We are kin. Now, our English language, of course, does not support this way of seeing the world. In English, and I assume in multiple other languages as well, I am an I, a subject, and the apple is an it, an object, a thing for me to regard or ignore, to eat or to toss over the fence, but not to relate to as family. And without this assist from our language, you and I must work a bit harder to shift our view of things and to remember what I suspect human beings once knew in the course of our evolution, that a deep kinship, in fact, does bind us together with all living creatures, and very likely all of creation, even the rocks, the mountains, the water, and fire. Francis of Assisi understood this. Be praised, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially brother sun. Be praised, my Lord, for sister moon and the stars, for brother wind and sister water and brother fire, for our sister mother earth, and finally, be praised, my Lord, for sister death, from whose embrace, sisterly embrace, no mortal can escape. Francis's Canticle of the Creatures celebrates our kinship not just with living beings, but with what we regard as inanimate things like wind and water and death. Francis, like the Potawatomi and other indigenous peoples, spoke using the grammar of animacy, a language which recognizes the world around us is not just an amalgam of separate entities, but that all of creation is one, a cohesive whole in which everything is deeply entwined with everything else. The great eco-theologian Thomas Berry has written, "We must say of the universe that it is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects." And the implications of that are far-reaching, for not only does it remind us that humans are kin to apples and stars, but as Robin Wall Kimmerer suggests, if a maple is an it, we can take up the chainsaw. If a maple is a her, we think twice. In my encounters with my twiggy friend at the edge of the New Mexican arroyo, I learned to bring no expectations or demands. She could offer no fruit, nor shade, nor strong trunk to lean against. She was too much a stick figure for that. So I learned over time how to just stand there and to be present to her in her treeness. And those moments when I was most fully present to her, I was more than willing to call prayer. In those moments of presence, I was loving that particular little tree, and in that, I was loving God. Be praised, my Lord, for Sister Tree, for she is the spindliest of all spindly beings, frail in form, but mighty in spirit, the life in her rising to meet the life in me, steadfast in all seasons, teaching me to trust my roots, teaching me to trust, O God, your slow, patient work. That was the prayer I prayed in my heart without my head knowing it. But some might protest vigorously, I know. That's all fine and dandy, but while you're off communing with your little tree, the world is burning up. And that is correct. It is burning up. And species are disappearing forever. And our land and water and air are clogged with toxic pollution. We are indeed in crisis, and we must act with urgency. And so we continue to join our organizations and to raise our voices, to contact our legislators and cast our ballots. We continue to write our checks and alter our habits of consumption and clean up after each other, and we continue to educate ourselves. We do all these things, and we trust that all the small acts add up to make a difference. But we do well at the same time not to forget to pay attention to our family, to nurture a friendship with a particular tree, perhaps, or to greet Sister Moon and the stars and to bow to her as she rises on a clear night, or to breathe in deeply as Brother Wind touches our face and brushes our hair this time of year in the late afternoon. If we do not notice the world around us, if we are not present to it, if we do not love it and love it fiercely and joyfully, well, perhaps the lack of such love is partly why we are in such dire straits in the first place. But to learn what it means to be family, to be a family with all of creation, and to begin to experience that kinship in real ways as we simply go about our daily lives, is in these precarious times an act of deep faith and deep love, and a life rightly named as a life of prayer. Thanks be to God. Amen.